faced with a sudden nuclear explosion. The woman, who hadn't had time to flee, was instantly reduced to ashes. 3 months later, in this radiation-filled wasteland, a masked man walked over. He found 2 cans in a zombie's backpack. However, Mark didn't seem pleased. Instead, he took out a radiation detector and aimed it at the cans. Soon, the device began beeping. Clearly, both cans of food were radioactive and completely unfit for consumption. This was the scene 3 months after the nuclear explosion. Radiation particles were everywhere in the air. That night, the man returned to his shelter. He hadn't eaten anything for a whole day, but in this post-apocalyptic world, he could only take a sip of his meager remaining water to stave off hunger. The next morning, Mark set out early to search for food. However, this radiation crisis had led to the near extinction of all living creatures. Soon, he noticed a strange phenomenon. The clothes on many zombies had been stripped off by someone. Today, he still hadn't found any food. He could only survive by drinking water. Just then, there seemed to be some commotion outside. He pulled back the curtain to look. Outside were 3 zombies, but immediately afterward, 3 figures lunged straight toward them. Mark quickly pulled the curtain shut and pulled out his pistol, aiming it at the car door. Fortunately, the group didn't notice him hiding inside the car. On the 3rd day, Mark stepped out of the car. The zombies from last night were still there, but their clothes had all vanished. After dispatching the zombies, Mark was completely exhausted. Since he was so hungry, he returned to the spot where he'd found the canned food 2 days earlier, but the canned food was definitely inedible. The only thing he could eat was the carcass of a rat lying next to a zombie. Mark had completely broken down emotionally by this point. To survive, he had been reduced to eating rats. Just then, a zombie approached from behind him, but just as the zombie drew near, a gunshot rang out. 3 men on horseback, armed with guns, appeared behind him. Mark immediately became wary, but this group merely took a photo of him. Then they tried to forcibly take him away. Terrified, Mark hurriedly fled, but unexpectedly tripped and fell to the ground, passing out. When he woke up, he saw that they were cutting his pants open. Mark wanted to resist but couldn't muster any strength. Immediately afterward, several of them hosed him down with water. Then the group dressed him in clean clothes. 2 of them escorted him into the elevator. The moment the elevator doors opened, Mark seized the opportunity to run out, but the door to that floor was locked tight. Soon, he spotted a knife lying there. Without a moment's hesitation, Mark grabbed the knife. Just then, a figure appeared behind him, pointing a gun at him, but the figure didn't harm Mark. Instead, he dressed Mark in clean clothes and took him to a place with water and electricity. Jim even gave Mark some food. Just as Mark was feeling very confused, Jim explained that he just wanted to ask Mark a few questions. Hearing this, Mark began to eat the food in big bites. However, all of Jim's questions were about where Mark was from. From their conversation, Mark also realized that Jim was clearly looking for someone. At that moment, they arrived on the rooftop. There were not only vegetables but also solar panels generating electricity. In the post-apocalyptic world following the nuclear radiation outbreak, such a scene was almost unheard of. Jim had built all of this up bit by bit with his team. Seeing that Mark couldn't provide any useful information, Jim decided to turn him away. Mark pleaded with Jim to let him stay for a few days, explaining that there was absolutely no food to be found outside in such harsh conditions, but Jim remained unmoved. Mark knew there was no other way, so he tossed Jim a necklace as a token of gratitude. Jim looked at the necklace in his hand and immediately asked Mark where he'd found it. Mark explained that he'd found it on a zombie. Jim said that if Mark could lead him to that zombie, Mark could stay here. And so, in search of Lisa, Jim ventured out into the outside world for the first time since the disaster. It was far more desolate than he had imagined because it was raining. Mark led them to the underside of an overpass. Just as Jim was examining the zombie, Mark suddenly asked Jim why he had come out to look for this woman. Hearing this, Jim froze in place. He had never mentioned that he was here to look for a woman. Jim immediately concluded Mark must have known both Lisa and him all along, which was why he'd so conveniently produced that necklace. He immediately demanded to know where Lisa was. Just then, the gang of looters who specialized in stealing zombie clothes opened fire on them. A fierce gunfight erupted between the 2 sides. Mark was unfortunately shot in the leg. Zombies in the distance, drawn by the gunfire, began moving toward them. In that moment of crisis, Jim chose to save Mark. The 2 took cover inside the car where Mark had been hiding earlier. Jim realized they had to get out of there immediately. Otherwise, if that gang found them, it would be a death sentence. He pressed down on Mark's wound and asked him where Lisa was, but Mark refused to tell the truth. Then Jim noticed a cardboard box in the car with the address Franklin Hotel written on it. Based on his previous investigation, he surmised that Lisa was most likely at that hotel, so he prepared to leave Mark behind and escape on his own. At that moment, Mark finally panicked and finally admitted that he knew both Lisa and Jim. But by then, Mark was no longer of any use to Jim, so he immediately opened the car door and rushed out, shoving the zombie aside. He mounted the horse and prepared to leave. Mark could only watch in despair as the zombies approached him.